Next on Link TV, Latin Pulse, news and analysis from Latin America as seen by Latin American media, followed by a panel discussion on the issues. Next on Latin Pulse, only on Link TV.
The following program is an original production of Link TV.
As Americans in the world focus on a possible economic catastrophe, Bolivia is struggling to avert its own catastrophe, one that could throw the American continent into a tailspin. 1 out of 3 Bolivians wants to split away and form their own country. Why would anybody want to do this in the poorest country in South America? Who is behind this movement, and why were the U.S. ambassadors to Bolivia and Venezuela sent home packing? We'll try to answer these questions and more up next on Latin Pulse. Hello and welcome to Pulso Latino. I'm your host, Ena Cuevas. Today's topic, Bolivia, on the verge of a civil war that could very well drag Latin America into a political crisis.
Evo Morales enfrenta el escenario más complejo de su mandato. En los números tiene el respaldo del 62% que le dio el sí en el referéndum de agosto. Pero en la práctica gran parte del país escapa de su control. Pando, Tarija, Beni, Santa Cruz y el Chaco cumplieron 15 días de protestas y enfrentamientos. Bajo este escenario, Morales cambió a 5 ministros de sectores claves para asegurar la economía, como la cartera de hidrocarburos y energía. Necesita proteger la exportación de gas y petróleo a Brasil y Argentina, que ha sido amenazada por los cortes en las rutas. Es su estrategia para asegurar la billetera del país e implementar reformas políticas con miras a la nueva constitución que espera aprobar mediante referéndum en diciembre.
Trouble began when a group of provincial governors started to promote independence. They want to break away from Bolivia's central government. The head of that government is Evo Morales, the country's first elected indigenous president. After 2 years of turmoil, Morales called for a referendum last August to consolidate his presidential powers. Chile's Tele 13 reports violence was rampant a few days before the vote took place.
Los más graves, las protestas de mineros en Cochabamba. Reclaman a Morales que mejore sus sistemas de pensiones. Dinamitaron 2 puentes y se enfrentaron con la policía a balazos. 2 mineros murieron y 12 personas más resultaron heridas de proyectil.
Morales won the referendum by a margin of 2-1. Regional broadcaster Telesur reports he came out punching, reinvigorated with the results of the election.
Lo que hoy día ha expresado el pueblo boliviano con su voto es para consolidar este proceso de cambio. Por eso quiero decir al pueblo boliviano, con mucho respeto, estamos acá para seguir avanzando en la recuperación de nuestros recursos naturales, en la consolidación de la nacionalización, en la recuperación de nuestras empresas del Estado.
Morales was also reinvigorated by the support he received from abroad, such as the government of Nicaragua.
Hoy expresamos nuestra solidaridad con Evo porque no es de ahorita que se viene diciendo al indio hay que votarlo. Pues el indio dio la oportunidad de que se abriera el proceso y los resultados ahí están. Pues al indio no lo votaron. El indio hoy se fortalece.
The results even surprised seasoned political analysts in Bolivia. They didn't expect the voter turnout, much less such a lopsided victory for Morales.
En realidad, Evo Morales y su gobierno han salido muy fortalecidos. Efectivamente, el 60% es inédito en la historia de Bolivia, en la historia electoral de los últimos tiempos y tal vez de todos los tiempos. Jamás un gobernante legítimo con una elección limpia, democrática, ha podido lograr semejante votación.
As a result, analysts now foresee a faster approval of Morales' policies in Congress.
Naturalmente, con este respaldo, el proceso de cambio se acelera, se profundiza, y eso es lo que quiere el pueblo boliviano, ¿no?
But the crisis in Bolivia didn't end with the vote. Morales won by a landslide, except in the 4 wealthiest regions of Bolivia. The governors of those departments say the proposed constitutional reforms will strip away their economic strength. Days after the referendum, Morales met with the 4 dissenting governors to try and reach a middle ground. But as Spain's Televisión Española reports, the meeting went nowhere.
La reunión privada con los prefectos opositores en el Palacio de Gobierno de La Paz pretendía encontrar una solución a la crisis política del país, pero el encuentro de más de 6 horas ha acabado con discusiones y desacuerdos.
Lo que siento de manera general, que los prefectos solo quieren plata y no quieren tocar una cuestión política.
El prefecto de Tarija, Mario Cosío, uno de los 4 líderes conservadores que desafían a Morales con procesos de autonomías, dijo que el diálogo no estaba roto y que solo se había abierto un paréntesis. Él ha sido uno de los prefectos que han abandonado la reunión en la disputa por el impuesto a los hidrocarburos.
The referendum didn't seem to satisfy the 30% of voters who voted against it. That's when violence once again erupted a month later. This time, though, it was a lot more serious and deadlier. Chile's Tele 13 has that story.
Son las imágenes más crudas difundidas desde que se desató la violencia en Bolivia hace 3 semanas. Corresponderían al 11 de septiembre, cuando un grupo de campesinos trataba de cruzar un río en el departamento de Pando. No se ven enfrentamientos, las imágenes muestran una matanza. El gobierno asegura que hay más de 100 desaparecidos. Ordenaron la detención del prefecto regional Leopoldo Fernández, al que acusan de genocidio y desacato al estado de sitio. La detención dejó en punto muerto las negociaciones para el plan de paz. Los prefectos de la oposición pusieron en duda la existencia de una investigación imparcial que permitiera la detención del prefecto Fernández, quien tendrá que enfrentar a la fiscalía junto a otros 2 políticos acusados de participar en los enfrentamientos armados.
Days later, Morales declared a state of emergency. He sent troops to the southern department of Pando, where they were met by gunfire at the airport. Regional broadcaster Telesur was there.
Este es el momento en que los militares llegaron para aplicar el estado de sitio recién declarado en ese momento. Fueron recibidos a bala por los paramilitares. Los soldados trataron de proteger los civiles presentes, pero en la refriega murieron al menos 3 personas antes que los soldados pudieran restablecer la calma.
Morales then attacked the United States, blaming it for the violence and the general dissent. He expelled the U.S. ambassador, accusing him of meeting with opposition leaders and meddling in Bolivia's internal affairs.
En mi declaración en La Paz es absolutamente falsa, sin fundamento, y es irresponsable realmente hablar de algunas acciones que nunca ocurrieron, y es realmente muy desafortunado que el gobierno boliviano ha dicho algo que es absolutamente fuera de la verdad.
As a sign of solidarity, Venezuela stepped in. President Hugo Chavez, Bolivia's strongest ally, expelled his U.S. ambassador. He did so in no uncertain terms.
¡Que aquí hay un pueblo digno!
Es el incidente más grave en las relaciones entre ambos países en los 10 años que Chávez lleva en el poder. El mandatario venezolano llenó su discurso de amenazas y volvió a advertir que no vendería más petróleo a los Estados Unidos si ocurre una agresión en su contra.
Si viniera alguna agresión contra Venezuela, pues no habrá petróleo para el pueblo ni para el gobierno de los Estados Unidos.
Government supporters quickly convened in front of the U.S. Embassy in Bolivia to protest against what they say is U.S. intervention in their country.
Siempre América Latina fue el patio trasero del imperio. Ha sido una América Latina esclavizada, sometida, sin derecho a pensar ni hablar.
The newly created Regional Association of South American Countries, UNASUR, quickly convened a summit in Chile to deal with the crisis. Colombia's RCN has that story.
El presidente boliviano Evo Morales denunció sin vacilaciones ante la cumbre de mandatarios de UNASUR en Santiago que en su país está en curso un golpe de Estado.
A explicar a los presidentes de Sud América sobre un golpe de Estado cívico-prefectural de algunos departamentos y estados de los últimos días.
Evo en la reunión extraordinaria estuvo especialmente respaldado sus principales escuderos, el presidente Rafael Correa y el presidente Hugo Chávez.
Están tratando de derrocar al presidente Evo Morales.
Chávez volvió a advertir que intervendrá si hay agresiones contra Morales.
Aquí en Bolivia está en marcha una conspiración internacional, una conspiración facturada y dirigida por el imperio norteamericano, tal cual ocurrió aquí en Chile.
Days later, Evo Morales appeared at the United Nations General Assembly in New York, asking for support from the world community and for the U.S. not to interfere in Bolivia's internal affairs.
Gracias a la participación de las naciones que ahora conformamos UNASUR, se derrota este golpe de Estado civil, intento de golpe de Estado. Pero aquí quiero decir algo, seguramente algunos de ustedes están esperando por qué la expulsión del embajador de Estados Unidos. Europa, Latinoamérica rechaza este golpe civil, pero menos el gobierno de Estados Unidos no condena estos actos de terrorismo.
Joining us from Washington, D.C., we have Christopher McMullen, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs. Thank you very much, Mr. McMullen. Can you give us some background as to what the situation is in Bolivia? Why is it that these departments want to break away?
Well, the situation in Bolivia has a long history of seeking autonomy. The eastern part of the country for a long time has wanted to have some degree of autonomy from the central government. And really it's, it's basically about revenue sharing. It's about the degree to which people can make their own decisions at the local level. It's about differences in ethnicity, the eastern part of the country being more mestizo, the altiplano or the highlands being more indigenous. It's about division of hydrocarbon resources. So there's a lot involved in this. There are cultural differences, major cultural differences between the eastern departments, the Media Luna, and the highlands. So it's got a long history to it, and it's turned a lot more violent in recent months, as you're well aware.
One of the things is President Evo Morales has accused the United States of interfering with these internal affairs. What is the reaction from the United States?
Well, as we said after the expulsion of Ambassador Goldberg, the charges are absolutely groundless and baseless. The United States meets with opposition members. The ostensible reason for his expulsion was meeting with opposition members. I was with Ambassador Goldberg when I visited Bolivia. We went around the country and we met with members of the government, we met with members of the opposition, we met with members of NGOs, non-governmental organizations. So it's quite common for our ambassadors, our political officers and embassy officers really throughout the world to meet with both members of the ruling party and members of opposition parties. So there's nothing unusual about that. It's just that we believe President Morales was trying to deflect attention away from internal problems and blame the United States for these problems.
With Bolivia being so far away, why should Americans care about what happens in South America?
First of all, there's the humanitarian factor. If things do spin out of control with violence, there's a very real chance of a lot of bloodshed in the country, which we all want to avoid. Second of all, it's about building democratic institutions. And really, since 1952, the revolution in 1952 that brought the power of the MNR, the United States has been on the side of reform and building strong democratic institutions. We funded land reform back in the 1950s and 60s, and we still believe in those principles of sharing the wealth in Bolivia. We should care, too, because President Morales is the first indigenous leader in Bolivia, and a lot is at stake. I think he serves as a model in many ways for other indigenous leaders at the local level and something to aspire to, just like President Lula in Brazil, coming from a humble background. And also I think we should care because if Bolivia is destabilized, the spillover effect will have a profound impact on neighboring countries like Brazil and Argentina particularly. in terms of the gas that they receive from Bolivia, in terms of large refugee flows, people fleeing the country. So there's a lot at stake, really, in what's happening there right now.
That was Christopher McMullen, Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs. In our studios to talk about the crisis in Bolivia and its hemispheric implications, we have Dr. Julio Moreno, Associate Professor of History and Co-Director of the Center for Latino Studies at the Americas at the University of San Francisco. And from Washington, D.C., we're joined by John Walsh, Senior Associate for the Andes and Drug Policy of the Washington Office on Latin America, and Luis Manuel Botello, Senior Program Director at the International Center for Journalists. Thank you, all of you, for being on Pulso Latino today. Mr. Walsh, let's begin with you. Why would the U.S. even bother intervening in Bolivia, as that is the accusation that Morales has?
Well, the U.S. and Bolivia have long-standing relationships. The focus for most of the last 20 years has been on fighting drugs, so it's not a matter of intervening just recently. There are deep suspicions in Bolivia that have a long foundation in the history of U.S. policy in the region of intervention, and in this case, the Morales government is accusing the U.S., and in particular the expelled ambassador, of working with the opposition to undermine or even topple his government.
Does this have more to do, let's say, with the natural gas reserves, or is it only about drugs?
Oh, no. The U.S. relationship has been focused on drug control, but the conflict in Bolivia has very little to do with that. It has very much to do with what you point to, gas resources, how the wealth is divided, questions of land reform and constitutional reform that has been bitterly opposed by elites, mostly in the eastern lowlands department, where, as it happens, most of the natural gas and oil resources are found.
Mr. Moreno, how did Bolivia get to this point?
Well, there's a number of things we have to keep in mind. First of all, in Bolivia, the Bolivian government has really struggled historically in terms of the legitimacy it has. It has historically been one of the most unstable countries in Latin America. It's reported at least over 180 coups in Bolivia since the country became independent. It has had over 200 presidents since its independence.
There's even been a president that was only in office for 6 hours.
Correct. So why is this important? Because to some extent, the governors that are refusing to accept the authority coming out of Evo Morales, they do have a precedence to the extent that they feel confident enough to challenge the central government. And if you think about it, that's a serious charge, as that would be the equivalent of California arguing that it needs to separate from Washington, D.C. because it disagrees with the Bush administration.
Mr. Botello, you work with journalists in the region, and some of the complaints that have been raised is that the coverage hasn't been fair. How is the issue being covered, and how is it a reflection of the divisions in the country?
Well, it's very clear. I mean, historically, Bolivia has been divided, as we have been seeing in this discussion, and the media reflects that division. Most of the media, as you probably know, is controlled by economic powers, traditional economic powers, some of them from the elites, but that's changing though, because in recent years the media, some big conglomerates have been bought by international companies with interests in Bolivia. But Evo Morales has incentivized that division among the media and the journalists, and of course among the people, by also creating a separate movement of community radios, investing over $2 million to create community radios that basically is to promote the government policies with the idea of bringing more fairness to the coverage, which probably is true. The problem here is the way that that's being done.
Mr. Moreno, Morales criticizes the U.S. for supposedly intervening in the country, but here we have Venezuela actually actively intervening and criticizing the Bolivian military.
Right, and of course, Evo Morales has his train of thought, his line is that that is necessary in order for him to preserve the political power in the country. What we see, as it's been described in the last few minutes, is really a struggle for power over who controls the media and who really exercises control in Bolivia in general, at the media level, the economic level, at the political level. And that struggle for power is bound to continue as long as we have other factors impacting the leaders of the various provinces that have separated. And I understand we will discuss that in a few minutes. But it really is a struggle for power. And Evo Morales has challenged the power of the elites, and they're trying to do whatever it is within their power to retain that power, to retain that control over politics, over the economic prospects of the country, over the media.
Mr. Walsh, aren't you surprised at the lack of criticism of the way that Bolivia has been reacting?
With regard to the situation, I think it's important to understand that the reaction of the Eastern Lowlands prefects, who I agree feel they are locked in a power struggle, I think they were startled by the extent of the show of strong support for the Morales government last month in the recall referendum, where the prefects and President Morales were liable to be recalled by the voters. That's not what happened either to the prefects or to Morales. In fact, he increased substantially his support from when he was initially elected to more than 2/3 of the voters. So I think that startled the prefects. They realized that their bid to undermine the president's legitimacy, I think, in their view, needed to escalate. And I think that fanned the flames, and with the help of the private media as well in the Eastern Lowlands, using the racist language. So on both sides, there's been an intransigence and an intolerance, and I think the key is for the prefects and their supporters in the eastern departments, and for the national government to realize that genuine dialogue, which is what they're supposed to be engaging in now, is going to require flexibility and concessions from both, and that the vast majority of Bolivians, no matter where they stand in a very polarized situation, want genuine dialogue and they want peace.
Mr. Moreno, why should people here in the United States care about what's going on in Bolivia?
Well, the different reasons. From a geopolitical point of view, it is essential for the U.S. Government to, in many ways, show reinstate, if you look at it from the point of view of the U.S. government, reinstate the authority and the legitimacy it had in Latin America. Within the last 8 years, the U.S. government really left, the Bush administration left this huge power vacuum throughout Latin America. And in light of that vacuum, you have different organizations or different governments throughout South America stepping up to fill in for that power vacuum, to the point where you have UNASUR in many ways becoming the power brokers or the mediators of these conflicts, which is ironic that as a result of this power vacuum, you have new organizations stepping in to try to, throughout South America, to mediate this national crisis in Bolivia. So from the point of view of the U.S. government, this is, in many ways, it provides it could be a historic moment where the new administration could redefine its role throughout South America, not by condemning the Morales administration, but by taking a stand where you negotiate, you discuss the challenges that Morales faces and how we in the United States move forward with a new type of policy.
And trying to start a dialogue. And Mr. Botello, the same question for you. Why should people here in the U.S. care?
Well, first of all, the United States, Mr. Walsh mentioned, have invested a lot of money, millions of dollars on drug control, the COCA program in Bolivia. And we can see what's happening in the country when also you engage so heavily in a country like Bolivia, which is, the other thing is that this is an example of what also could happen when you abandon your policies in the region.
Great, and these will be huge challenges for whoever comes up in the new administration. I want to thank our guests here in San Francisco, Dr. Julio Moreno, Associate Professor of History and Co-Director of the Center for Latino Studies in the Americas at the University of San Francisco. And in Washington, D.C., John Walsh, Senior Associate for the Andes and Drug Policy of the Washington Office on Latin America, and Luis Manuel Botello, Senior Program Director at the International Center for Journalists. I also want to thank you, if you're watching us at home or joining us on the web, for being with us today. We also want to thank American University in Washington, D.C. for their support in the production of this program. Join us next time when we take a closer look at Latin America through the eyes of Latin American media. For more information about Pulso Latino and Latin America, just log on to linktv.org. I'm Ana Cuevas. Thanks for watching. We'll see you here next time on Latin Pulse.
Latin Pulse was made possible by support from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Pulso Latino es posible gracias al apoyo de John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation y el William and Flora Hewlett Foundation.
This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. network dedicated to global and national news, uncompromising documentaries, and diverse cultural programs. Programs that connect you to the world.